Transform your business with Microsoft Azure, the one-stop shop for everything cloud and AI. With Azure Migrate and Modernize, move your existing workloads to Azure with ease. With Azure Innovate, build new solutions with focused and deep engagement. Their core offerings provide comprehensive resources, expert assistance, and cost optimization tools. Accelerate your cloud journey and stay ahead of the competition with Microsoft Azure. Visit aka.ms/Azure Hero Offerings to learn more. That's aka.ms/Azure Hero Offerings to learn more.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. It is February of 2023. We've already reached February, more than a 12th of the way done. Was that about 8%, 9% of the way done? So hope everybody's doing well. Hopefully the audio quality in this one sounds a little bit better than last week. Apologies for that. I am back in the United States, if only for a couple of days between stops. I've got another 2 weeks of this world tour that I'm doing. So anyways, I'm going to do my best to try and record the rest of these on the good microphone. Hopefully I can accomplish that. We'll do the best I can. A week or so ago, our friends over at Software Defined Talk, Brandon Witchard, who's on quite a bit, and Cote and Matt Ray and all those good folks, were talking about this 2023 word of the year, which was this word enshittification, which is a term coined by Cory Doctorow, who is an interesting character, to say the least. Anyways, it was basically they were talking about, how does anybody use the internet? Because nowadays, so many of these platforms that we come to rely on, that we deal with every single day, have become sort of big and bloated. They've added a million features, as most platforms tend to do. And Cote kind of threw out this thing and he said, yes, the internet gets big and unwieldy and, systems sort of grow upon themselves. And he said, maybe Brian can figure out some way to come up with a model in which, businesses don't kind of go down this path. And so, I'm taking this as a little bit of a challenge. I don't know, having thought about this now for a couple of weeks, exactly what the right answer to this is, but I thought it would be interesting to sort of dive into. So we're going to dive a little bit into, what is this concept? How does it happen? And then some of the ramifications of it from a business perspective, both on the business side of things as well as the user side of things, what expectations are, and all that sort of stuff. So we'll get to that after the break. Is your cloud bill out of control? CloudZero is building a platform that will let you analyze your cloud investment faster than ever before. You'll get accurate, granular visibility into your total cloud spend without the typical pitfalls of legacy cloud cost management tools like endless tagging or clunky Kubernetes support. CloudZero is how cloud-driven companies gain more financial control and predictability by driving immediate and ongoing savings. You can answer questions like, how can I save 20% of my cloud bill right now? Who are my most expensive customers? How much does this specific feature cost our business? Join companies like Rapid7, Drift, and SeatGeek by visiting cloudzero.com/cloudcast to get started today. Again, please visit cloudzero.com/cloudcast to get started today. And we're back. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, we're going to dig in a little bit to this challenge that Michael Cote, or Cote as many of you know him, kind of threw out to me a few weeks ago on their show, trying to, I guess, look at this concept of enshittification as it relates to the technologies that we use every day and the businesses that we work with on a regular basis. And is there any way for businesses, especially internet businesses, to not go about doing that? And so the first thing I had to do, because I guess I had sort of heard this term kicked around from time to time. I had no idea it had become this big of a deal, that it had become the word of the year or digital word of the year. I'd sort of heard it kicked around just on various platforms, Reddit and Twitter and all that sort of stuff. So I went and looked it up, and this is the way it's sort of described from the original blog. So here's how, quote unquote, here's how platforms die. First, they are good for their users. Then they abuse their users to make things better for their business customers. Finally, they abuse those business customers to claw back all the value for themselves. Then they die. I call this enshittification. And it is a seemingly inevitable consequence arising from the combination of the ease of changing how a platform allocates value, combined with the nature of a two-sided market, where a platform sits between buyers and sellers, hold each hostage to the other, raking off an ever larger share of that value that passes between them. And then he goes on to sort of explain some things and talks about how platforms are sort of monopolies. And he says to solve the problem, Dr. Oak has called for two general principles to be followed. The first is a respect of the end-to-end principle, fundamental principle of the internet, in which the role of a network is to reliably deliver data from willing senders to willing receivers. And the second is the right of exit. And the right of exit being users of a platform can easily go elsewhere if they are dissatisfied with it. Okay, so let's sort of start with this concept, because I think where this is all coming from and why it's bubbling up these days is, I feel like there are a bunch of themes that we've been talking about the last year or so, but in particular last 6 months, that are freaking everybody out because the last 10 years haven't really followed these principles. But if we go back in time, or we just look at sort of business 101 principles, a lot of these things sort of come into play. So, in essence, what they're saying is there have been a number of platforms in which, and they use Amazon and Facebook and Google Search and Reddit and Twitter X and others that are out there, in which a digital platform was out there, and the service, some of the basic capabilities of the service were delivered for free. At least there are no cost to use these services. And now they are beginning to say, well, because the company that runs the platform has a growth strategy in which they want to grow at a higher rate than they are, or continue to grow at the rate they were before, they are beginning to stop offering all those services for free, and they are beginning to charge for those services. That's the most basic aspect of this. So I think the first thing that and what's interesting is the way that a lot of times these conversations get framed is the company that stops allowing things to be free or changes their model or whatever it is. They are an evil entity, and the users are sort of left to peril, left to suffer for no longer having this thing. And this is sort of I think this is the reality that we're going to face, and it's an interesting reality because to a certain extent, and people like Ben Thompson have covered this as they talk about platforms and aggregation and all sorts of things. I'll put some links in the show notes. The internet essentially grew up around this idea that, various aspects of it could be free if either enough data about the usages could be captured, right? So how you use the service and the data around those activities that you did could be captured and then monetized in some other way, but not monetized directly to you. Or the second thing was, could that data then be used to sell some sort of advertisement, if you will? And again, this goes back to this thing on the internet, which, in which we think of the internet as this sort of new medium. But to a certain extent, the internet is just sort of an extension, and this is a bad analogy, but it's sort of an extension of what television originally was. And for, the younger kids out there who probably don't even know what television is anymore, I know my kids don't, because for whatever reason, we have a 50 or a 60 or 70 inch screen in our house that never gets turned on, but yet they're more than welcome to, more than happy to sit on the stairs of the house and stare at a 4 or 5 inch screen when they could be looking at something that's 100 times as big. But anyways, the original concept of television, or the original way in which television was rolled out to the masses, was that, you bought a television, you bought a thing that interacted with the medium. The medium was in essence was delivered for free. Again, this is before we were paying for cable TV or anything. Everything was just sort of over the air, and it was ultimately paid for by advertising, right? So, you'd watch a sporting event, or you'd watch a soap opera, or you'd watch a, weekly television show, and, maybe 7 or 8 minutes out of every 30 was going to be advertisements or commercials, if you will. And so the internet eventually sort of, figured out how to do that, except instead of having 3 main channels, they had 500 channels or 5,000 channels or 500,000 channels. And so they were able to monetize across all those channels. And because it was much more, specialized, i.e., they collected your data and they knew something about you and they knew the patterns at which, how long you listened for and all these, there was sort of a direct digital interaction. They were able to supercharge the amount of revenue they could make, but also, they began to supercharge the number of capabilities that you had. And so we have this fundamental thing in which the expectation of the internet from the user's perspective is that all of the great capabilities should fundamentally be free. And yet we also want the companies that are doing this to continue to be innovative and scale and be able to keep up with all the latest things, all things that cost tons and tons of money. For any of those of us who work in technology, we know the amount of time and effort and technology and scale and all those sort of things happen. So fundamentally, I think there's this sort of belief that like the problem here is like late stage capitalism and all these sort of things. I think the bigger challenge with all this sort of quote unquote enshittification is that we went from a society that we were okay with. We used to be okay with the idea that certain things were free, and we put up with things like commercials and advertisement. And then at the point where we started allowing the end users to actually not only consume all these things for free, but then start to give control to them to say, I also don't want the sort of commercialism part that goes with the sponsorships, the ads, the commercials and so forth, is where we basically broke the covenant. We broke the agreement. We broke the social contract that existed that said, these two things can exist, right? Sort of all this stuff for free, but also the businesses that run them are able to operate, right? So since we broke that ability from a digital perspective, we created this thing in which the only way in which platforms could continue to grow was to collect more data about you or offer more ways to, as Corey says, sort of address the other side of the market, which was, sell more ads or whatever it might be. And that fundamentally is sort of the problem we have. I don't think that, to Kote's original question, like, can you stop quote unquote enshittification? Yeah, you absolutely can stop it, right? There's multiple ways you can stop it. The first one, and I don't believe either one of Corey's two, I think are actually incorrect. This sort of idea that, networks are just supposed to be reliable, dumb things. Well, that's not really what we're talking about here. We're talking about a thing in the middle that isn't just a pipe. And the second thing is this idea of, you should just be allowed to leave whenever you want to. Well, you absolutely are allowed to leave whenever you want to, right? It's this misguided belief that we have that, when you leave, everything that you got value out of, that somebody else created value for, you should just naturally be able to take that with you as if, well, all my followers on Facebook should just automatically go with me over to X, or they should go over with me to Threads or whatever, right? So I think his two, ways to fix this are actually kind of wrong or pie in the sky. I think what we have here is, there are ways to fix this, right? Number one way to fix this is you may find that some businesses just say, look, kind of out of the goodness of my heart, out of the charity of what I want to do, or, maybe an intended way of doing this is saying, look, I am willing to subsidize some aspect of my business that if I wanted to, I could make more money on. But the subsidization of that aspect of the business, it could be big or small, is actually really beneficial to the bigger part of my business in which I'm trying to monetize it and profitize it at a higher level. So let me give you the most basic example to this, and this won't make sense to everybody around the world, but if you're in the United States or you've sort of listened around, there's a big box outlet here in the United States called Costco. Costco sells sort of everything. It's a brick and mortar store. But if you've been into a Costco, one of the things they have is a food court. And within the food court, everything that's in there, has this sort of market level pricing. So you want to buy a piece of pizza, or you want to get a sandwich, or you want to get a soda or milkshake or whatever. It's going to mostly cost you sort of market rate, whatever the market rate is. But the one thing they do have that seemingly has never changed in price is their hot dog combination. So you get a hot dog and you get a drink and maybe you get a bag of chips. I forget what it is. And that has been $1.50, $1.50, $1.50 US forever. And the CEO of the company, even though they've gone through various changes, has said, under no circumstances will that change. In fact, if anybody ever comes and tries to take over the company, I will come back. I will rise up out of my grave, if you will. I will come out of retirement and I will find a way to get that person fired because I want that small aspect, which is something that people have kind of come to expect, to stay the same, right? So in essence, he is still, even though the cost of that whole thing probably is now more than $1.50, or at least, the break even of it, it's more than $1.50. He has said, I'm not going to change that. So that's one way you can sort of get around the quote unquote enshittification, is that you can hope that the businesses will say, hey, I'm either willing to treat some aspect of it like a charity, or I'm willing to treat it as a loss leader or something I'm going to subsidize for something else in the business, right? And that's not terribly unusual, right? Like we see this in Amazon with some of the services they have, right? For them to run, for example, like the Kubernetes service costs them, more than they charge for it. But because of the fact that, if you use their Kubernetes service and many, many other services, you have to use their network, you have to use their storage, you have to use their compute and a bunch of other services. That's their way of sort of getting you in the door and subsidizing certain aspects versus other things and so forth. The other way that they can go about doing it is, and this probably isn't going to go about happening, is, they can manage their business in a way in which the growth rates, the expectations of the growth rates are lower. And, here's the thing that most people don't, when they get angry at businesses and they want to, talk about greedy capitalists and all these sort of things, Wall Street doesn't tell the business what rates, what level of growth they have to grow at, right? There's nobody who necessarily goes to, Facebook or General Motors or Apple or whoever and says, hey, you must grow 40% year over year. You must grow 27% quarter over quarter, right? It's in essence them saying, hey, business, what do you expect to grow at? And based on that, I will then, we will then do the math and establish a price in the marketplace. And then the market can determine whether they think the price is right or too high or too low. But all those expectations are based on the company saying, hey, this is what we think we can grow. And this is where the other part of the, the quote unquote sort of enshittification often happens, is that, we see these companies that have, a certain expected growth rate and they either make it or they miss it, right? So I saw a quote this week when Amazon announced their earnings and AWS missed, and they missed by like $20 million. And somebody on there, I think it was Corey Quinn or somebody said, well, they missed, but that was because the analyst had projected this thing. No, the analyst could have had a number that they thought was going to be made, but these things are, based on the company telling the market, these are the goals we've set for ourselves. And, we've set out a business plan for doing that. We think we have an execution plan for doing that. And the analyst community can go out and say, well, I'm going to go check with the marketplace and see where I think they're doing, right? In the marketplace, their resellers and their channels and their customers, they might say, oh, well, it feels like maybe they're actually doing better than that, right? But the numbers weren't reset by that. They have expectations based on numbers they have. So again, I think part of this is a recognition that businesses set their own goals, and that businesses, at least from a leadership perspective, and they've found this historically over time, that the best way to motivate the leaders of the company is to say, I'm going to tie your compensation and sort of your future standing with the company based on, ownership, big picture things of the company, not giving you the largest salary possible, but giving you goals and hence equity and ownership and other things that are tied to you achieving bigger company level things. And so where the downside of this comes in is, most leaders in a company don't stick around that long, right? They might, the average length of a CEO's tenure is like 3 years, something like that, 2.5 to 3 years. Maybe it's 4 years, but it's not 20 years, right? It's very unusual that you see a CEO that stays in that long. And so, when you build their incentive structure around company growth, they're going to push the company as hard as possible to drive growth because it's in their best interest. Now, it might not necessarily be in the best interest of that person that's 6 or 7 or 8 layers down from them. But, part of the quote unquote, kind of growth expectations or things that, people might think drive, quote unquote, enshittification, are goals and expectations that are set by the company themselves and by the company setting up, how the leadership structure is paid, right? So, it's like anything, you kind of get what you pay for, and you're going to get what, how the system is set up for it. I mean, you may not have the right consequences of what you thought it was set up for, but you're going to get, that sort of thing. So, at the end of the day, there's an old saying, there's a sort of famous old saying in business. It's from a guy named Jim Barksdale, who was the CEO of Netscape, was there when they first created the first commercial browser. And he was giving an interview somewhere and they said, hey, how are you going to make money in this business? Or how does all this stuff sort of work? And this was the early days of the internet. And he said, well, basically there's only 2 ways to make money in business: bundling and unbundling. And he has since given a bunch of interviews around this. I put a few links in the show notes. But at the end of the day, this sort of enshittification concept is all driven around the idea of mostly bundling, right? You build a platform, you try and give away more and more of it for free because you are essentially trying to become the center of a person's end user's addiction to you. And you want to bundle more and more of that. And that's the belief that the more I bundle together of that, the more of your data I can then collect, the more opportunities I have to monetize it on the other side of the platform and so forth. And, again, this goes back to kind of human nature. At any point in time as a human, if you see value in getting out of that thing, in unbundling yourself, you absolutely have that option. But to believe that, somehow the platforms are going to do that for you, when you haven't paid them a dime, they've created all the value for you necessarily, right? You haven't necessarily created value for them directly. To have this belief that they should forever be looking out for you, you have the option to leave, right? You have the option to create your own value by unbundling. And the second part of it is the platforms themselves will forever try and increase their value through bundling, and the market from time to time will step in, not as stepping in like, an adult in the room, but stepping in by saying, hey, your bundling is no longer creating value. And, and this is where we see, things like private equity come in or, bankruptcy come in, and, the market then, or the buyer then comes in and does the unbundling for you, in which, they go, we're going to break off these parts. These parts are no longer needed. They generate no value. These parts here, if they're isolated and, kind of grown by themselves, they will create net new value. So, the market inherently takes care of the bundling and unbundling. And again, everybody has a say in this. The end users have the ability to buy into the platform and say, hey, I want to use the defaults lifestyle and just continue to use the thing. That doesn't necessarily mean that everything will be great. It just means you've chosen to reduce the amount of friction of changing tools, of, having to learn multiple things, but you may eventually run into your own level of quote unquote de-shittification. The platforms themselves are trying to create value through bundling, as we've talked about, is, kind of the most prominent way of going about doing that. And the end users or the marketplace are the things that are going to drive the unbundling. It's very rare that the platforms themselves will ever look to do the unbundling. And I think the longer we realize those two things, that the longer you expect that, free gives you some sort of stake in how the game works, where, you don't pay for anything, but you get frustrated when, the companies behind this try and change this to be profitable. That's kind of that's kind of on you for being frustrated about that. You have the ability to unbundle yourself from those things. But the longer that you are tied to them, and the more that you expect that they will do all the work for you, and then not try and monetize it in some greater way over time, as we all kind of understand that the purpose of business is not to be a charity, but it's to generate profits and so forth. That's where the friction of this sort of lies, and where you can be an active participant in deciding what you're willing to put up with. So I think we forget sometimes that as things are free more and more, free isn't free. Free like a beer versus free like a puppy. But also, the bundling and unbundling aspect, people have control of it. They may not always feel like they have control of it, but, the markets themselves, have a known pattern of platforms trying to bundle, and either end users or the marketplace itself, kind of actively trying to unbundle it to generate, its own value for that. So I don't think there's any great answer to this, how to create de-shitification. I think it's really a more of a matter of, understanding what your role is in the game, what your role is in interacting with platforms and multi-party platforms and all those sort of things. And then just deciding, hey, at what point am I frustrated with something and I'm willing to go look somewhere else, right? You have that option, especially on the internet. There is always some sort of option. But the reality is it may not be as simple as it was before. And, but that might be to you valuable, right? So anyways, probably not a great answer, probably not the answer that the Cote was looking for. There is no silver bullet to it. But again, I think it's understanding that, companies are created for a reason. If they were created to be charities, they should be defined as charities. If your expectation of them is that they are a charity, that's on you. If your expectation is that they will continue to, only serve your best interest when they are free, that's on you. But there are opportunities for businesses to sort of de-shitification themselves. But in most cases, that's only going to happen either because, somebody wants to keep that $1.50 Costco hot dog out of the goodness of their heart, out of their willingness to sort of sacrifice, or it's part of a bigger sort of subsidization play, or get you in the door sort of play. It's probably not going to happen in most cases over the long run of things. So anyways, no great answers there. But I think sometimes, where people are more frustrated by this now than maybe they have been in the past. And mostly, again, this is because for the last 10 plus years, we have been living in a zero interest rate world. We have been living in a world dominated by your initial engagement with any platform, with any technology, with a lot of things that have been free. And, there becomes this sort of addiction to, sort of the goodness and the freeness of things, without the understanding that at some point, if you depend on stuff, it's probably not going to be free forever, especially not in the way that maybe it was initially, where you did no work and those types of things. So not a knock on users, not a knock on the business. I think it's just an understanding that, it's easy to get frustrated by these things, but, you do have a certain amount of control over it. It's just, you need to recognize, once you either give up control or try and take back control, what additional tasks are you ultimately going to be responsible for? So anyways, with that, I'll wrap it up. Interesting topic, not necessarily an easy answer, but I think sometimes it's at least good to understand, how the system works and what you might be able to do within the system. So with that, I'll wrap it up. Thank you all for listening. Hope your February is going well. Thanks for telling a friend about the show. Thanks for helping us grow the show. Keep downloading the show. Keep trying to keep up with it, so that Apple and the other ones don't get rid of your podcast. I know they're changing how things are downloaded, so hopefully you get a chance to do that. But with that, we'll wrap it up and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.